It was the sound that haunted every soldier, the moaning, not just once, not just from one man, but again and again, over and over, as feet hit the snow-covered ground and minds tore through bone and flesh. That field wasn't just a trap. It was a graveyard waiting to be filled. And standing at the edge of it, young Lieutenant Samuel Lombardo could still hear the cries. But that moment, that dreadful march into the mine-laced clearing, wasn't where Sam's story started. No, it started long before that, in the dusty streets of Calabria, southern Italy, beneath the ever-watchful eyes of Mussolini's black shirts. Sam was born into a country already shadowed by oppression. His earliest memories were not of freedom or joy, but of forced salutes and fear. Every week, the town would gather in the square, raising their arms high as the fascists paraded past. Even as a child, Sam knew something wasn't right. He didn't understand politics, but he understood fear. He saw it in the trembling of old men who couldn't lift their arms high enough. He saw it in his mother's pale face the day they hid the forbidden flags. One American, the other socialist, beneath the attic floorboards. And he felt it, burning in his chest, when he screamed and thrashed like a mad child to distract the fascist officers. It worked. They left. But the weight of it never did. His father had always dreamed of America, a land where a man could work, live, and breathe without watching over his shoulder. He had once made it there before being pulled back by duty and war. The First Great War had swallowed that dream for a time, but not forever. In 1929, when Sam was just 10, the Lombardos received the call they'd been waiting for, the chance to finally leave Italy behind and start fresh. The journey to America was long and fog-choked, but Sam had one thing on his mind: the Statue of Liberty. He'd heard the stories, seen the pictures, and dreamed about it until he could almost see it in his sleep. So, while the rest of the ship slept, Sam crept out into the cold morning air. The fog was thick, swallowing everything, but slowly, as if the heavens themselves heard his prayers, the mist lifted, and there she stood. Tall, beautiful, proud. A silent promise that life was about to change. They landed, and Sam's father gathered the family on the sidewalk like it was sacred ground. He looked at his sons with stern eyes and spoke the words that would never leave Sam's heart. Remember your heritage. Be proud of your heritage. You can't change that. But America? America is our new country. Sam never forgot. But the world outside America wasn't finished with war. As the 1930s bled into the 40s, the black clouds of fascism rose again, this time under Hitler's shadow. Sam, now a young man, knew it was coming. He saw it before many others did. He told his parents, told anyone who would listen, "We're going to go to war." They didn't want to hear it. His parents had escaped one nightmare. Why would their son run into another? But Sam insisted. If he joined the National Guard early, he'd be trained, prepared, and ready. "I'll have a better chance of living," he said. But deep down, it wasn't just about survival. It was personal. Mussolini had tried to crush people like him. Hitler was worse. Sam wanted to fight. He wanted to stop them himself. Fort Benning, Georgia, became his proving ground. He trained hard, rose through the ranks, and walked out a second lieutenant, proud and determined. Then, in 1944, the call finally came. Europe needed soldiers. Sam was going back, not as a boy under Mussolini's boot, but as an American officer, ready to fight. They landed at Omaha Beach in October. The chaos of D-Day was months behind, but the battlefield was no less brutal. Sam joined the 99th Infantry Division, tasked with pushing through the Roer River and breaking the Siegfried Line. It was mud. It was blood. It was cold, bone-cracking cold. They pushed forward slowly, carefully, always waiting for the next shot, the next explosion, the next night patrol that might never return. And then came December, and with it came hell. The Battle of the Bulge hit like a storm, unexpected and merciless. German forces unleashed everything they had. Sam dug deeper than any man around him, 7 feet into the frozen ground. When his commander questioned him, Sam just said, "You wait until the bombardment comes. You'll know why." And when it came, 25 minutes of fury, it shook the earth. Navalwerfers, mortars, cannons. The sky turned black and screamed. Men cried out. Earth exploded. And that deep, deep hole Sam had dug? It saved their lives. The last shell hit right beside them. The dirt fell in, but the shell never broke through. They lived. Barely. When it was over, the silence was almost worse. 5 minutes of eerie stillness. Then came their own artillery, American retaliation. But the German thrust? It never came. They had held. And yet, even in survival, something in Sam ached. He missed something simple, something powerful. He missed the flag, not just any flag, the American flag. Sam missed the flag more than he missed warm meals or dry socks. In the middle of that frozen, brutal Belgian forest, with death in every direction and silence that carried the weight of fallen friends, what Sam wanted more than anything was to see the stars and stripes. Not because it was just a piece of cloth. No. For him, it was everything. It was family. It was freedom. It was all the things Mussolini had tried to take from him and everything he had found again in America. It was the voice of his father on that New York sidewalk saying, "America is our new country." It was the face of his mother, trembling but brave, hiding forbidden banners in the attic. It was his own choice, to leave comfort and safety to fight against tyranny. But there were no flags in foxholes. He wasn't on the supply chain. No fancy shipments, no ceremonial gear, just grit, rifles, and the weight of war. Still, the thought gnawed at him, day after day, until one night, Sam had enough. "We'll make our own flag," he told his sergeant. Just like that. No hesitation. Some might have thought it was a crazy idea. They were waist-deep in snow and surrounded by death. And this lieutenant wanted to start a sewing project? But it wasn't about fabric. It was about spirit, morale, purpose. The kind of purpose that could carry you across minefields, if it had to. They scoured the abandoned town nearby, just a skeleton of shattered homes and silent windows. But there, among the ruins, they found treasure. White pillowcases, deep red fabric, and a thick dark blue curtain. The colors were perfect, eerily so, like fate wanted that flag to exist. Sam ordered a man to borrow a sewing machine from the town. Not steal, borrow. Even in war, honor mattered to him. That night, as the wind howled outside their shelter and artillery echoed in the distance, the men of either company worked like tailors possessed. Needle by needle, stitch by stitch, they crafted the flag with frozen fingers and tired eyes. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful. 3 by 5, bold and alive with meaning. They didn't hang it like a trophy. They carried it like a heart. Every time they were pulled back into reserve, those short, fragile breaks between battles, they worked on it, even if it meant sewing till midnight and waking up before dawn to attack again. And the attacks kept coming. By the end of the Bulge, the 99th Infantry Division reached the border of Belgium and Germany. That was their next mission. Clear the area. Clean out the last of the German forces hiding in those cursed woods. 3 companies were sent in waves. First L Company, then K, then Sam's I Company. And that's when the nightmare began. The first man stepped into the clearing. Boom! He hit a mine. His leg exploded in an instant, and he dropped screaming into the snow, painting it red. No one could help. He was just lying there, moaning, his body trembling from shock. Then came K Company. Same route. Another step, another mine, another man down, more moaning, the sound of pain so raw and helpless it scraped your soul. And now it was Company's turn. Sam's turn. He stood at the edge of that cursed field, staring at the snow. He couldn't see the mines. No one could. But they were there, hundreds of them, waiting. The men looked to him. Their eyes said what their mouths couldn't. What now, Lieutenant? He thought of everything in a flash. Fort Benning, his mother's trembling hands, the flag, his father's words, and then, silently, he looked up at the sky. God help me, he whispered. He took one step. Nothing. Another. Still nothing. Crunch. 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 With each step, he felt death brush past him. He didn't walk. He survived every inch. 250 yards of pure terror. Every breath could have been his last. But when he reached the other side and turned around, there they were, all 65 of his men, walking in his footprints. Not one of them had strayed. Not one had fallen. Not one had died. He didn't cheer. He didn't cry. He just breathed. 3 days later, the snow melted. Sam returned to the field with one of his men. Curiosity had taken hold. He wanted to see what they had walked through. As they looked down, the truth revealed itself. Mines, hundreds of them, every 3 feet. Stretching out like death's own chessboard, Sam knelt, tempted to pull back the grass and see the mine with his own eyes. His soldier grabbed his arm. "Lieutenant, let's not stretch our luck," Sam paused, then nodded. They walked away. He never did touch that mine. The war didn't end that day, of course. It kept dragging forward, hungry and heartless, swallowing more men and more time. But something had shifted in Sam's soul after that march through the minefield. Not because he survived, but because they all did. 65 lives in perfect formation, each footstep a quiet miracle. And somewhere deep in that snow-covered silence, something unspoken was sealed between Sam and his men. Trust, respect, maybe even love. The kind forged only by war. Word of what they'd done spread fast, faster than Sam liked. He didn't want to be a hero. He didn't feel like one. Heroes were the men still moaning in that field, or the ones buried beneath makeshift crosses, names barely scratched into wood. But still, officers whispered, soldiers saluted with more weight in their eyes. His men looked at him differently now, not just as a leader, but as someone who had walked through death and brought them out the other side. The handmade flag became more than just cloth. It became theirs, a symbol of what they were fighting for, yes, but also a reminder of what they had already survived. They carried it in their packs, unfurled it in secret moments of rest, stitched repairs into it when holes appeared from battle smoke or rough handling. It was their banner, born not in a factory, but in fire. By spring of 1945, Germany was crumbling. Hitler's once mighty war machine was sputtering out. Town by town, factory by factory, the Allies closed in. Sam saw horrors along the way. Burned villages, starved children, bodies that lined the roads like warnings. The enemy still fought hard, but it was with desperation now, not confidence. The 99th pressed forward, crossing rivers, taking bridges, hunting pockets of resistance like shadows. And then, just like that, it was over. May 1945. Germany surrendered. 1 minute, they were at war. The next, it was done. Sam stood on a quiet ridge that morning, staring out across what had once been a battlefield. Smoke still curled from chimneys. Birds sang. And for the first time in months, there was no gunfire, no mortars, no screaming, just silence. But it wasn't peace. Not yet. Not inside. Because peace isn't a switch you flip. It has to work its way in, through the cracks. Sam felt hollow at first, like the war had carved something out of him that he might never get back. And then he thought about the flag. the Handmade flag. He gathered his company, what was left of it, and told them the news. "War's over. You're going home," some men cried. Others just stood there, stunned. Before they parted ways, the Men of I Company held a final ceremony. No generals, no photographers, just soldiers. They pulled out the flag, creased, weathered, stained with sweat and dust. Sam expected them to fold it up and carry it home as a keepsake, maybe pass it down to someone's children. But instead, something else happened. One of the men stepped forward, Sergeant Rosen. He looked Sam in the eye. "We want you to have it, Lieutenant. You started it. You led us. It's yours," Sam blinked. His voice caught in his throat. He accepted the flag with both hands, holding it like a newborn. It wasn't just fabric. It was every night they'd stayed awake under shell fire, every mile they'd marched with aching feet, every man they'd buried, and every breath they'd stolen back from death. When Sam returned to the United States, he didn't keep it for himself. He gave it to Fort Benning's Infantry Museum. The flag belonged to history now, to all the men who never came home, and the ones who did with ghosts in their eyes. Years later, Sam returned to the museum, expecting to find the flag tucked away somewhere in the archives. Instead, he found it displayed in the most prominent place, at the infantry entrance, right where it belonged. For a long moment, he just stood there, staring at it through the glass. The stitches weren't perfect. The colors had faded slightly, but it was still beautiful, because it was real, and it had survived. Home looked different when Sam returned. Streets were wider. People smiled easier. The war was over, and the country had moved on, eager to celebrate victory and bury the pain. But for men like Sam, there was no real return. Not fully. He walked through crowds with the eyes of a soldier, always scanning, always aware, always quiet. The noise of home was too soft, too peaceful. It felt strange. He didn't talk about the minefield, didn't talk about the bodies, or the sound a man makes when his leg is torn off by steel and fire. People wanted stories of glory. Sam gave them polite smiles, said, "We did our part," and changed the subject. But at night, when the world slowed down and the lights went out, it all came back. The pounding, the moaning, the whispers of dying men, their breath fogging in the cold, the silence after the shelling, the kind that could make your skin crawl. He'd sit at the edge of his bed and rub his hands together, trying to chase the cold that wasn't there. Sometimes he'd dream of that long, deadly field, not the moment he crossed it, but the moment he looked back. 65 soldiers, every one of them walking in his exact footprints, every single one of them trusting him not to die. That was the kind of weight no metal could measure. Still, life moved forward. Sam found work, quiet work, and he kept his head down. The war had left its mark, but he didn't wear it like some men did. He wasn't bitter. He wasn't angry. He was just quieter now, more careful with his words, more grateful for simple things, a warm coffee, a sunrise, a child's laughter in a park. Occasionally, people would recognize his name. "Weren't you the one who crossed that minefield in Belgium?" They'd ask. He'd nod, maybe offer a few words. "Just did what I had to," he'd say. But one story he did tell, more than once, was about the flag. He'd tell it with a glimmer in his eye. How they'd found the pillowcases, the red curtain, that perfect blue fabric. How they stitched it together like a band of brothers on borrowed time. How it was more than cloth. It was the heart of the company, their soul, sewn in cotton and courage. And always, at the end of the story, he'd say, "That flag is at Fort Benning now, right where it belongs." Sometimes the people he told would nod politely, unsure of what to say. Other times, they'd ask if he missed it. He always said the same thing, every day. But it's not mine anymore. It never really was. It's everyone's now. Years passed. The flag aged, but Sam did too. His hair went silver. His steps slowed. But the pride never faded. One day, someone arranged for a group trip to Fort Benning. A dozen or so people, family, friends, even a couple of curious strangers, wanted to see the flag he always spoke about. Sam didn't expect much. Maybe it'd be in a drawer, maybe a small case in a corner. But when they walked through the infantry entrance, there it was, right up front, spotlighted, respected. People stopped in front of it, reading the small plaque beneath the glass. Some just stared, like they were trying to understand the gravity of what they were seeing. But Sam didn't look at the plaque. He looked at the stitches. Each one reminded him of a night in the cold, of a man who didn't make it, of a laugh shared around a fire, of the silence that followed the bombardment, of 65 men walking behind him, footstep by footstep, trusting him with their lives. And for a moment, he didn't feel like an old man in a museum. He felt like that young lieutenant again, back in the snow, marching through hell, carrying more than a flag. Years went by, but time didn't dull the sharp edges of memory. For Sam, the war never faded into the background like it did for most people. It stayed sharp, vivid, etched into his bones. Some days it came rushing back with a sound, a smell, or even the way someone raised their voice. Other times, it came slow and silent, creeping into his dreams, pulling him back into foxholes and frozen forests. But he didn't run from it. He respected it, the way you respect fire after it's burned you. He began to speak more about it, not in loud, patriotic bursts, but in quiet, steady stories. At schools, at community halls, to young people who'd never seen war except in movies. He didn't glorify anything. He didn't shout about bravery. He just told the truth. He told them about the minefield, about the fear in his chest with every step, about the silence of 65 men walking in a single line, holding their breath. He told them about the flag, and something started to happen. People listened, not politely, truly listened. Some students cried. Some asked if he ever hated the enemy. Others asked why he didn't freeze up, why he didn't run when the first man exploded. And he always gave the same answer. I was the leader, he said. They trusted me. That means something. He didn't think it was extraordinary. He thought it was what any good man should do. But the world had changed. Leadership like that wasn't something people saw every day, especially not from a man who looked like someone's grandfather, quiet and soft-spoken, with warm eyes and steady hands. One evening, after a speech at a high school, a boy no older than 16 came up to him. Thin, nervous, barely able to look Sam in the eye. He said, "My brother's in the army. I'm joining next year. I'm scared. Do you think I'll be brave enough?" Sam looked at him for a long moment. Then he placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and said gently, "Bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about doing the right thing, even when you're terrified." The boy nodded. Then, with shaking hands, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a small American flag. Nothing special, probably bought at a dollar store, but he held it out to Sam like it was gold. "Would you sign it?" Sam paused. He took the flag, ran his fingers across the cloth, and nodded. Sure. He signed it slowly, carefully, like he was carving something into stone. To the boy, it was just a signature. To Sam, it was a reminder. The next generation was watching, and maybe, just maybe, they understood. Not long after that, the Infantry Museum at Fort Benning reached out to him. They were planning a veterans tribute, an event to honor living soldiers with exceptional wartime leadership. They wanted Sam to speak, not as a representative, not as a guest, as the main speaker. He didn't say yes immediately. He sat with it for a few days, tried to imagine what he'd even say. What could possibly be said that hadn't already been chewed up by documentaries and war books? But then he thought of the flag. the one they had sewn together in the dead of winter, with enemy shells in the distance and hope barely hanging on. He said yes. On the day of the tribute, the museum was packed. Soldiers young and old, journalists, families, children in their best clothes. Sam stood behind the podium, the spotlight warming his wrinkled face. Behind him, on full display, was the flag, the one he had carried, not just on his back, but in his heart. He didn't read from a paper. He spoke from memory. He told them about the man who stepped on the first mine, the moaning, the panic, the silence that followed. He told them how he prayed, and how he walked, how every step felt like it might be his last, and how he kept going anyway. At the end, he looked out at the audience and said something he hadn't planned to say. "I'm not a hero. The heroes are the ones who didn't come home. But if I left you with anything today, let it be this. Lead with courage. Walk first. Step into danger so others don't have to. That's what leaders do." There was silence, then applause. But Sam didn't smile. He just looked at the flag. And for a moment, he was back in the snow, 65 men behind him, and the world holding its breath. After the tribute, Sam didn't expect much to change. He figured he'd go back to his quiet life. Maybe get a few more letters, the occasional handshake from someone who'd seen his speech online. But something was different now. The story, the real story, was out. And once people heard it, they couldn't unhear it. The interviews came first. Newspapers, radio stations. Then came the history students, writing theses about battlefield leadership and wartime morale. A professor from a military academy even called him a case study in human resilience. Sam chuckled at that. "I'm no case study," he told the man on the phone. "I was just a scared kid doing what I had to do." But he said yes to the interviews. Not for ego, for the flag. Every chance he got, Sam talked about the flag. He wanted people to know it wasn't stitched in pride. It was stitched in desperation. It was built during stolen hours, under blackout conditions, surrounded by the sounds of dying men. It wasn't born in glory. It was born in grief. And that made it sacred. One day, he received a letter from a young woman in Kansas. Her grandfather had served in the 99th, in K Company. She'd grown up hearing pieces of the story, mostly about the Minefield, the men who didn't make it. But it was Sam's speech that tied everything together. She wrote, "My grandfather didn't talk much about the war, but when your name came up, he always said, 'That man saved lives.' Thank you, Lieutenant. You kept my grandfather alive long enough to meet his granddaughter. I'm one of the lives you saved, too." Sam folded the letter and placed it in a wooden box beside his bed. There were more letters like that. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. Each one different, but all echoing the same truth. Leadership doesn't die with war. It leaves ripples. But not all the memories were warm. Some nights still hit him hard. One morning, Sam sat on his porch watching the sun rise through the autumn trees. A car passed down the road, backfiring loudly, and just like that, his chest tightened. He was back in Belgium, back in the dirt, back under that awful, endless shelling. His hands trembled. He closed his eyes, took deep breaths. It passed, eventually, but it left him shaken. That afternoon, he took a drive to the local VFW hall, walked in quietly, nodded at a few familiar faces, and sat down in a circle of worn leather chairs. No microphones, no cameras, just other men who understood. He told them everything. About the first mine, about the moaning, about the field, the footprints, the snow, about how every night he still felt the cold biting at his toes. One old Marine across the circle looked at him and said, "You carried 65 men across death. You don't walk away from that clean, Sam." Sam nodded. "No shame, no self-pity, just understanding." The next week, he went back, and again the week after. The war was long over, but healing never had a deadline. That spring, Sam got an invitation. The U.S. Army was organizing a special remembrance ceremony in Europe at the site of the Battle of the Bulge. Dignitaries would be there, generals, historians, and they wanted Sam to speak on behalf of the surviving infantrymen. He hesitated. He hadn't been back since the war. He remembered the frozen riverbanks, the smell of wet wool and burnt metal, the ghosts. He wasn't sure he wanted to see it all again, but something in him said, go. So he packed a small bag, flew across the Atlantic, and rode a quiet military convoy through the rolling green hills of Belgium. The towns had rebuilt. The forests had grown back. The scars had softened. But Sam still recognized it. The fields, the trees, the roads, and finally, the minefield. It was empty now. Just a meadow, peaceful, quiet, no blood, no fear. He stood there for a long time, alone. Then he did something he hadn't done in 80 years. He walked across it, slowly, step by step, not to tempt fate, but to thank it. When he reached the other side, he turned around. There were no men behind him this time, but in his heart. They were all there, 65 souls marching through memory, following his lead. One last time. When Sam returned from Belgium, something inside him had settled. It wasn't closure. You don't close a chapter like that. But it was peace. The kind that doesn't come from forgetting, but from finally facing the full weight of what had happened, where it had happened, and why. He was nearly 100 now, and while his body had grown tired, his mind was still sharp. His memories hadn't faded, not even a little. If anything, they'd grown sharper in his final years, like the closer he got to the end, the more clearly he could see the beginning. He began to write. Not a memoir. Sam didn't care much for books with his name stamped across the front. He started a letter, one long letter, to the men of I Company. He didn't know who was left. Many were gone. A few, maybe, still breathing somewhere in quiet homes, holding photos of younger versions of themselves. So he wrote it for all of them. He wrote about the first day they met, fresh from training, not yet hardened by war. He wrote about the foxholes, the frostbite, the cold that felt like it wanted to eat through their bones. He wrote about the bad jokes they told under fire, the little moments of laughter stolen between gunshots, the way one man had carved his fiancée's name into his rifle stock, swearing it kept him alive. He wrote about the minefield. He described every step, every thought, every heartbeat. How he prayed. How he didn't think he'd live past the third step. How he saw them behind him, walking in his prints, and felt something deeper than courage, responsibility. He wrote about the flag. How it was their creation, not his, not just his, theirs, and he ended the letter with a line that came from somewhere deep inside, a line that didn't feel written, but remembered, if there's a heaven, I hope there's snow, and I hope I'm the first to walk through it, so you boys can follow and never have to worry again. He signed it. Lieutenant Samuel Lombardo Thurbin Company, 99th Infantry Division. Just one of the lucky ones. He left the letter with a local veterans group, asking them to read it aloud at the next reunion, if any men from his company still showed up. And if not, he said, read it anyway. The dead deserve to hear it, too. A few months later, Sam's health began to decline. Doctors used soft words, but Sam wasn't afraid. He knew his time was coming. He didn't fear death, not after the things he'd seen. Death had walked beside him across a minefield once. Now it was just coming back to finish the walk. In his final week, he asked for one thing: to see the flag. One more time. He didn't want it pulled from the museum. He didn't want it shipped in a box. He just wanted to be there, to sit near it, quietly. So they made it happen. A small military transport van, a short drive, a few careful steps, and there he was, sitting in his wheelchair, wrapped in a blanket, looking up at the glass case that held the most sacred object he had ever touched. No one said a word. Sam stared at it for a long time. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just whispered, "We did it, boys." A week later, Sam passed away in his sleep, peacefully, the way men like him rarely get to go. The flag stayed in its case, but next to it, in the museum's main hall, they added something new, a brass plaque. It read, "In honor of Lieutenant Samuel Lombardo, for leading his men not just through war, but through the impossible, for walking through hell so others could live, for showing the world that courage is measured in quiet steps, not loud victories. Follow me, but don't step out of my footprints." Years passed. Visitors came and went through the halls of the Infantry Museum at Fort Benning, school kids on field trips, retired veterans in ball caps with campaign patches, wide-eyed young recruits standing at attention, as if trying to absorb courage from the walls themselves. Some would stop in front of the flag and read the plaque. Some would just pass by, unaware of what it truly meant. But every now and then, someone would stop and feel it. They'd stare at that slightly faded flag, stitched from stolen bits of cloth during a war that nearly swallowed the world, and something in their chest would stir. A few asked the guides, "Is that the flag they made in the war? The one from the Minefield story?" And the answer would always be the same. Yes, that's his flag. They didn't have to say his name. Most of them knew it already. Samuel Lombardo, the man who led his men across death, one quiet step at a time. The flag became more than a museum piece. It became legend. Teachers told the story in classrooms, using his Minefield March as a lesson, not just in war, but in leadership, in courage, in character. Military academies built case studies around it. Lombardo's March, they called it. A test of decision-making, situational ethics, and human responsibility. Cadets were asked, "What would you do if you were him?" Most hesitated. Some answered bravely. But no one dismissed the weight of the choice. One young officer, fresh from West Point, came to the museum just to see the flag before shipping out. She stood in front of it for nearly an hour, saying nothing. Then she turned to the museum guide and said, "If I'm ever in a position to lead like that, I hope I remember where he put his first foot." Back in Pennsylvania, Sam's grave sat on a gentle hillside, marked with simple words, and a small American flag that fluttered in the wind. No bronze statue, no eternal flame, just a name. And below it, a line chosen by his family. He walked so others could follow. Veterans came to visit. Some were too old to stand for long. They'd sit on folding chairs and look at the headstone in silence. Others brought their children and told them, in low voices, about a man who once crossed a minefield without losing a single soul. Sam didn't leave behind millions, no massive estate, no best-selling memoir, but he left something better. A story that didn't need to be loud to be unforgettable. He left a flag, stitched in fear, carried in honor, remembered in reverence, and he left a trail of footprints, not just in snow, but in history. A line of quiet, determined steps that reminded the world what it means to lead, to believe, and to serve something greater than yourself. In the end, there were no marching bands, no trumpets, just a flag, a field, a whisper, "Follow me." And they did. They still do.